Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our attendees joining us today for this latest Data Science Central webinar. This is Stephanie Glen, your host. I am the Editorial Director at Data Science Central. I'd like to start our event off today by thanking Trifacta for sponsoring today's event. Trifacta is a long-time supporter of the Data Science Central community, and we are honoured to have them sponsoring our event today. Today's webinar is entitled Weaponizing Data in the Fight Against White-Collar Crimes, to be presented by Trifecta. And before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format of today's webinar. Today's event will be 1 hour long. We have two presenters who I'll introduce in just a minute. There will be a 10 to 15 minute Q&A following the presentation. And this event is being recorded and will be available on datasciencecentral.com later this afternoon following today's live event. I'd also like to encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation. We will be reviewing and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speakers, Alasdair Anderson, an independent consultant, and Matt Derda with Trifacta. Alasdair Anderson has over 20 years of experience in the banking and finance industry and has helped lead data and analytics initiatives at ABN AMRO, HSBC, and Nordea. In his previous role as Executive Vice President and Head of Data Engineering at Nordea Bank, he was responsible for the delivery of the bank's financial crime intelligence and analytics platform, as well as ensuring that the bank's data platform supply timely, accurate, and trusted data to internal and external subscribers. That's in order to support all bank core functions. Alasdair speaks frequently throughout Europe and the United States on the topics of data management, analytics, and innovation, and holds positions on multiple customer advisory boards of the data and analytics vendors with which he partners. Matt Derda leads customer marketing at Trifacta, where he focuses on helping Trifacta customers communicate the value they're generating from initiatives to modernize data management, analytics, and machine learning. Matt's own experience as a data wrangler at PepsiCo means he is well versed in the challenges of getting data ready for various analytics initiatives. He uses this experience to establish strong relationships with Trifacta customers and help them promote their innovative work to internal and external audiences. Thanks for being with us today, Alasdair and Matt. We're looking forward to your presentation. In today's webinar, analyst and advisor Alasdair Anderson will discuss how escalating global white-collar crime activity is driving adoption of advanced analytics at a pace never before seen in mature enterprises. Organizations are having to change the way they deal with data and change the types of data that they utilize. The old data management adage of garbage in, garbage out has been left behind as organizations realize that agile wrangling of all data is far more valuable than static, historic, curated data sets. In today's Data Science Central webinar, you will learn how large organizations are using data to fight white-collar crimes, the crucial role cloud technology plays in advanced analytics, why data wrangling is a key functionality in dealing with garbage data. Alasdair and Matt, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can begin as soon as you're ready to go.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you, Stephanie. What we're going to do is just get started to get a good gauge of who's in attendance. We'd just like to know what function your role is currently. So do you identify yourself in an IT function, a data scientist role, business analyst, or would you say other? We'll give everybody just a couple quick seconds to fill that out, and the results are coming in. All right. I think we're just about there. And not surprisingly enough, data scientist is one of the larger portions. Most people fall into the other category. That's very interesting, but typically what we see for an audience for a webinar like this, most people are falling under the category of data scientist. And I will hand it over to Alasdair now to go through how you can weaponize data to fight white-collar crimes in the financial industry.
Thank you very much, Matt. Hello everyone, wherever you are in the world. What I'm going to talk about today is just an overview of what I am seeing in my role as an advisor within the financial services industry. So I'm primarily a banking technology person. What approaches I have taken in this space, what solutions are required, what problems we're addressing, and what changes I have seen in the industry when compared with the traditional approach. So I think something that we saw from the poll, there's quite to 25% of the audience here today is data science people. And what I would say is common amongst our community is that you're often having to justify why data science, but you have to do that within the context of a business problem. And I use the metaphor of when you're trying to do your justification, your sell, if you like, are you selling sort of vitamins or are you selling painkillers? And within the sort of financial world and within the even the enterprise world, it tends to be that painkillers are far more effective way to get your message across, get your capabilities understood, and get support for what you're trying to do in the data science world. The most stark sort of example of this is within the level of fines now being levied on the examples here of global banks. Actually, if I was to, I submitted the slides a little while back, but if we were to update these, I think there's an even bigger scandal coming out of Australia from Westbank Bank. But you're looking at an industry where there is almost a constant flow of breaches within the regulatory regime. This comes after the 2008 banking crisis, where the public globally and governments were asked to step in and help the banking industry. So you have this conflict of banks who wish to be far more socially responsible, wish to behave much better, but are constantly challenged and found to have fallen short of their expectations as organisations. So really, what is the response to that? What could we do about that as an industry? And also, what part does data science play within that space in terms of being able to do a better job and make these companies behave more appropriately and be more responsive to the public expectations? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some time to understand some of the core functions of a bank and what the organisation structures and the capabilities look like in order for you to understand what the problems are that are out there. So when you look at what an organisation or a banking organisation or financial services organisation, this would also be true within insurance and the fund management industry. There's a sort of super grouping of functions, as they're called, which come under the big banner of risk and compliance. Now, banking people have a tendency to use acronyms and language which is not publicly accessible, so I'll try and decode some of these for you, and then we'll map it to data science capabilities later on. So KYC is an acronym. It means know your customer. So basically, who are you dealing with? Have you verified who that person is? Transaction monitoring. Who are people sending funds to? Transaction is a nice way of saying where are payments going? Where are movements of cash going? Where are movements of securities or maybe even metals going? Sanction screening is a very important thing. We, as a global economy, deploy sanctions in order to encourage countries to behave the right way that we want to. And therefore, any breach of those sanctions are essentially a breach of what the global community is trying to achieve in terms of forwarding certain peaceful agendas. And the last piece is the newest piece, which we'll probably talk about at length, which is intelligence. So if you think about the way you would construct a secure mechanism, you would always have what you would call a first line of defense, a perimeter, and then you would have something deeper. So the intelligence function is something that is new to the industry, that we are trying to be more smart about what we do. If we take a deeper look at some of these functions and start to see what are the complexities within them, when we talk about KYC, we have to be able to verify a customer, but on a continual basis. It's not enough to sign up as a customer and then be left alone for 30 years. You have to validate that person's identity. You have to have multiple points of validation. You have to be absolutely sure you know who you're dealing with. There's instances within the industry where one person has been had multiple identities within the same organization, or you have organizations where criminal cartels are behaving almost like one entity. So you have to really understand your customer base, who they are. The sanctions and transaction monitoring is something that can be never switched off. You should not confuse this with simple fraud alerts. So, I walk into a retail store somewhere in Europe, and then at the same time I make some sort of grocery purchase in South America. These sort of rules of behaviour are very well catered for. This is about movements of money, more akin to if you think about maybe a gambling cartel, the way people try to manipulate sporting events and gambling patterns, that sort of surveillance. And that then leads us nicely into the last part. When the banking industry is looking at how it can do better in this space, it really takes its inspiration from the intelligence community, that deep analysis of networks of people and patterns of activity over a very, very long tail of historic behaviour. So what has been the sort of challenges within the industry that has stopped us from being effective? So the first one I've pulled out here is master data management. As a way of identifying entities, I would say customers or clients is a little bit too generic, but as a way of dealing with data. I've actually personally, and I've been in the industry over 20 years, I've never seen a master data project be tremendously successful. And that leads to, I don't really know who my client base are. I don't know who my clients are. I don't know what companies they work for. And I am unable to really say with a level of certainty that is appropriate, I know who we do business with. The second point is that rules-based systems are just there to be broken. So when you have a very static rule system, a workflow system that is looking for a very, very strictly typed set of behaviours, it is not going to pick up when criminals change or bad actors change their behaviour. You need an adaptive learning mechanism that allows you to really start to understand how people are behaving tomorrow, the day after, as quickly as they change those behaviours. In a very simple example, if criminals work out what the rules are, it's very easy for them to game that system. And I think the last point, and it's a point that is very well known in the data science community, is that there is an absolute explosion of data. So when you look at social media, actually traditional media has gone through a renaissance period as well, with a huge diversification. You have so many different points of triangulation to determine what is an appropriate behaviour, a different behaviour, people acting together, or something that is absolutely new. And when you couple that with the failure of the traditional way of managing data and working with data, or certainly maybe not the failure, that's quite a strong word, but the shortcomings of it, adding in more data, more complex data, less structured data into the mix, makes life very difficult for us as an industry. I mean, I use this sort of simple comparison. We have had a lot of focus in the industry in the sort of business intelligence approach of we must have this beautiful report that you can drill down, drill across, and then you'll understand all of your data. The reality is that in any given organisation, you could be facing thousands of operational systems. They may be managed inconsistently across geographies, across jurisdictions, and therefore it's very difficult to get those straight lines that you're looking for. You're looking for something that can adapt and understand and interpret and work with really quite a messy environment. Your data must represent the reality that you work in, not some sort of idealized way that you would like your business to be. So that's sort of the problems. What can you do about it? As with all webinars and presentations, here we have an architecture diagram. You shouldn't take this as anything more than a bunch of concepts. But what I'm trying to point out is general approaches and ways of thinking, principles, if you like, of how you would put together a platform, a data environment that would allow you to cater for all of these challenges that we've discussed. So this, and it's really, it's quite important to say this isn't an on-premise diagram, this isn't something to do in the cloud, this is something that you should look at as its capability and a concept. Okay, so the first thing I would say is you have to be able to access all of your data. You can't, it's not good enough to only have a limited view of the data within your organisation and outside of your organisation, and as is indicative of the behaviour of your customers when you're looking at fraud, white-collar crime and financial crime. So you have to have a sort of everything data store, I've called it here, sort of Amazon.com of data. So you should try to load in as much of the information in the raw format. So don't process it, don't refine it, don't touch it. Just get it available to analysts to do their work. When you have that data there, make sure that you have, I call it deep and wide security, but really you're looking at a spectrum of accesses. So what the marketing department are able to see is a far different question from what your financial crime department or maybe your risk and compliance department are able to see. So to that end, you must have a sliding scale of security measures within your platform, and this must be implemented at the lowest possible TCO, so total cost of ownership. You've got to keep this as cheap as possible because you're going to want to do more and more and more of this stuff, and if your unit cost is too high, then you will hit the invisible hands of economics, which will restrict the amount of data and analysis as you can do. So the first thing I call out as a do not do is do not try and get a single version of the truth. I'll touch on that later on. Do not have an open platform where anyone can do anything. That is really just asking for trouble. You are any organisation, and you just need to look in your internet. There's one of these stories every week. Any organisation is one data breach away from a significant failure and a big issue. So you need to be really, back to that point about deep and wide security, you need to be really careful and thoughtful about how you implement your control and audit type mechanisms, such that you can say to the people who regulate your industry, or even just the customers or governmental agencies themselves, you know, we can be sure that people are accessing the right data for the right purpose. But be mindful that you have to do that in a delivery time that allows people to continually ask lots and lots of questions. Now, one of the boxes I've got in that diagram is data quality. That is not to say that data should always be put through the same quality process, but it should be measured for data quality, such that people can determine if the data is enough and appropriate enough quality in order to be used for their purpose. A really simple example within financial crime is fraudsters tend not to complete all the information asked for in an application form. So actually the absence of data can be just as telling as data itself. So one of the things that I mentioned there was don't create a single version of the truth. When I've come out with this before, especially in the sort of traditional data management community, people have cried heresy that how could you say this? But my response is quite simple. If there was a single version of the truth, we wouldn't have lawyers. The truth resides in the questions that you're asking and what perspective you ask them for. Therefore, you must be able to get multiple visions of the same data set and be able to ask different questions of the same data multiple times. To my end, the garbage data is reflective of the world that we live in. The world is incredibly complex. It's getting more complex all the time. Our systems are becoming more diversified. Information is becoming more fragmented. And I think this is only going to increase. This is the reality that we live in. The question I think you have to ask yourself is, how are you going to deal with it? Are you going to hire lots of people to sit at desktop processing solutions and basically spreadsheet your way to victory? Or are you going to put in an intelligent, automated, secure way of doing things that allows you to process information in a much more robust, repeatable and scalable way? Actually, I didn't mention at the start of the presentation, but I'm based in the Netherlands. I live in Amsterdam. And I actually saw an article in the Dutch press just a week ago where one of the big banks here was saying that they were hiring hundreds of analysts in the financial crime space. And the quote in the paper was, because this job cannot be automated. Now, for me, that is a red flag. There are obviously jobs in this world that are difficult to automate, heart surgery or something like that, and human intelligence is always going to be required. But the reality is that in the data processing world, once you've done it multiple times, you must be able to either teach an algorithm or codify some sort of repeatable process that can allow you to scale. If you fail that test of how do I automate this, then you're probably not looking at the problem the right way, or certainly you must at least have a parallel process that can check what the humans are doing. So a human-only activity will not allow you to address the challenges that we're facing now and that we will face tomorrow. I think for me, one of the important things I've learned when I've been working with data is that you're never going to get things right the first time. Here we have a very famous methodology from John Boyd from the US Air Force, and the OODA loop. You can use different methodologies. You can look at the problem different ways. But for me, it's very, very simple. You're never ever going to get the precise, repeatable answer that you want the first time. Or if you are, you're probably going to go back and check it anyway. So this leads me as a way of approaching the world that we work in. This leads me to talk about the sort of rinse, wash and repeat type method. And Trifacta describe this quite simply, or much better than me, as wrangling. You're going to have to do things again and again and again. You're going to have to do some fairly menial data management tasks. We know that data science is 80% wrangle. Some would argue that the other 20% is taken up by complaining about the wrangling. But you want to be able to do that in the most elegant way, repeatable way, and least man effort intensive way as possible. So let me just leave you with a final slide here. This is in true sort of demonstrated fashion. This is an architecture and approach that was put into one of the big European banks. Actually, a few years back now, they're a repeat customer of Trifacta's. And this really demonstrates all of those capabilities that we're talking about. So the platform was created, the data was stored in its raw format. There was a metadata and a data governance process that happened to that data to allow understanding of the tags. And then we would go into a query model and then test type loop. And that was really powered by the Trifacta software. It allowed us to reduce by almost 80% the amount of manual effort taken by the finance, risk and compliance functions in dealing with the data sets that they were working with. It allowed them to continually wrangle the information until they got to a point where they were happy enough with the data that they could access, and then it was published further for collaboration. So, you know, a really tightly closed loop manufacturing process that dealt with the data from source to consumption in a way that allowed them to continually improve all the time. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand back to Matt.
Thank you, Alasdair. My favorite part of your presentation was if there was one single source of truth, we would not need lawyers. That was great. That was my favorite line. Thank you very much again. And we just have one more quick poll question for everybody. And it's kind of a leading question, but does your organization currently have data preparation challenges? And not surprisingly, most people do. About 90% of organizations who are associated with the people on this webinar do have data preparation challenges. And exactly what Alasdair said, and I'll touch on it in a minute, is, you know, you can't have the garbage in, garbage out methodology. You have to be able to handle the data that you have, and also be able to clean and prepare it to be able to make sense of it and tell a story. And I'm going to tell you just briefly about Trifacta. I'll keep it pretty short, and then we can spend time going over your questions at the end. But Alasdair mentioned that data wrangling is not optional, it's necessary, and that is essentially what Trifacta does. So when you have various sources of data spread across, you know, siloed data sources, disparate data sources, we're able to clean, prepare, or wrangle the data for any downstream consumption. So if you're building an enterprise data warehouse, using it for AI and machine learning, or business intelligence, doing data onboarding, making dashboards, we're able to connect to those sources and help merge the data and clean the data together. And as Alasdair mentioned, it's a common fact you hear, or a ratio, is 80% of the time is spent cleaning the data, and you know, the joke always being that the other 20% is complaining about the data. But that is a direct quote from DJ Patel, the former chief data scientist under the Obama administration, that 80% of the work in any data project is in cleaning the data. And with Trifacta, we try to reduce that time, because it impacts the entire team, from the data analyst, the data engineer, and the data scientist. Like, getting the data from its source to the downstream consumption can be a pretty daunting task, and can create bottlenecks within your organization at various points. And Trifacta does this by empowering the domain experts, so the people who know the data the best, to be able to work with it and make sense of it, and be able to tell that story, and be able to create the algorithms, which Alasdair was discussing about, you know, knowing your customer and being able to track who they are and knowing who you're doing business with. And it enables IT to collaboratively curate and operationalize the data pipelines. So they work with the domain experts and the people who know that data. And instead of it being, you know, 100% dependent upon IT as it traditionally has, where the business needs data or needs to be able to analyze or create reports, and having to send that request to IT, and IT sending the data, and then there has to be changes made, so it has to go through this continuous cycle. It's more of a partnership, and it's more collaborative. And IT can also establish an enterprise-wide platform that allows for various sources, and then also tracks lineage. Everything is managed through the security parameters that are already in place, which I'll touch on more in a little bit. But it creates a collaborative environment between IT and the business analysts that traditionally didn't exist before. And this is also just a quick view of some of our customer bases who are doing various types of analytics, such as predictive modeling, business intelligence, data onboarding, risk and compliance, audit, testing and validation, and data migration. So not only do we fit into use cases within that financial sector, but all different types of use cases across various industries. And how does Trifecta do it? We do it through what we call self-service speed and being cloud native. And you'll see parts of the interface right here. So self-service, like I said, self-service is kind of a big buzzword, and that's what everybody's kind of wanting to do, but it's also governed self-service. So it is that relationship between IT and the domain experts. But Trifecta does have an intuitive visual interface. So when you do connect to your source data, it is in a grid-like format. So it's a very traditional view of the data, and helps people be able to visualize, conceptualize, and profile the data while maintaining the governance and lineage that's set in place. We also create a recipe when working with the data, so there is self-documented lineage that's in a natural language. So if you know code or don't know code, you should be able to understand what is happening to the data with the Trifecta actions. And speed, it's when you're working with data in the grid, you simply can select data or highlight data or use any of the functions in a point-and-click manner, and you get instant previews that allows you to do continuous validation. So if you think of preparing data in the sense of code, traditionally what you'd have to do is write your lines of code, run data at scale, validate your results, and then make adjustments and continue that cycle. With Trifacta, you do that in real time. So you get faster iterations to your results, so you can prepare the workflow and see what you're doing in real time with the data, as opposed to having to kind of work blind. And when you do select something within the user interface of Trifecta within the data, Trifecta will give machine learning driven suggestions and try to do some of the heavy lifting for you up front and estimate what you're trying to do with the data without having to enter code. And then also you can automate the data pipeline. So you can operationalize these workflows as well. The user can schedule them. You can also use API functionality to be able to connect to outside operationalization tools that you have in-house. So it helps put workflows into production faster, and then you also have the ability to share, test, and version control as well within Trifecta. And finally, we're also cloud native. So we're across all the cloud vendors, AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure. And what's the most important thing about that is we're already using the security and governance that's in place on those platforms. So as Alasdair mentioned, you may have marketing have a different view of data or be able to access different data sources than risk and compliance would. And through the Trifacta interface, if that's already a security measure that's set up within your architecture, that would be directly reflected in Trifacta as well. So somebody on marketing is going to be able to use Trifacta, but not access data that they're not allowed to access or is only for risk and compliance. So we leverage the security that's already in place. And finally, I just have some, I call them bragging slides. This is just a quick sample of some of our customers within our base. So we spread across, multiple sectors, industries, and companies of various sizes, not just only the financial industry, but retail, insurance, pretty much everything. And we've also been consistently ranked #1 in by industry analysts. So we've been ranked #1 with Gartner and as well as Ovum, Dresner, and Bloor. And we're consistently in the leadership position in the Forrester Wave as well for self-service data preparation. If you would like to see Trifacta in action or try it out, we do have a free trial on our website. So if you go to trifacta.com/start wrangling, you can sign up for a free trial. The free trial is our cloud version, and it has all the functionality as our enterprise platform, and you get that for a period of 14 days. We also do have a cloud product that is free that's got limited functionality and limited data size, but you do have those both of those options to be able to see Trifacta in action, actually test it out on your data. We also have sample data sets that you can use as well to learn the functionality and see what Trifacta can do. And I encourage everybody, if you are interested, head to our website and try out that free trial. And with that, I will hand it back over to Stephanie for Q&A.
Well, Alasdair and Matt, thank you for that excellent presentation. We'll get started with today's Q&A session, and I want to thank the audience for their participation. We have a great many questions that have come in during the presentation, and we'll do our best to get through all of them in the remaining time. During this Q&A session, I will leave up this screen with contact information for Alasdair and Matt if you'd like to contact them for a copy of the slide deck following today's webinar. All right, let's get started. The first question that came in, what are the biggest risks facing financial organizations today, and how should they be preparing to protect their data?
So I'll take that one. This is Alasdair. I think the biggest risk in terms of actually monetary risk is almost certainly from fines from financial crime breaches. I mentioned in the presentation the latest sort of scandal coming out of Australia from Westpac Bank. I think the potential liability for that breach, or years of breaches, was in an order of magnitude that was almost equal to Australia's GDP and far greater than the market capitalisation of the company itself, which is just an astonishing set of facts that you're now talking in the billions of dollars as liability, or pick your currency, but certainly a huge challenge for these organisations. I think in the modern sort of world, in the modern enterprise, I think reputational damage is almost as sensitive. And to that end, I think all organisations, whether they be financial or not, are running a huge risk with their customer data if they're not able to use it appropriately and protect it. So as much as all these analytical capabilities are, I would say, absolutely essential to the financial organisations, I think all organisations are looking to utilise analytics. But if they're not able to do so in a compliant and responsible way, in a way that their customers can be justified to their customers, and this goes very much for the sort of retail and e-commerce type world, then I think they're running a huge potential operational risk that people will lose trust in them. And when you lose trust, then you actually don't have a business anymore. So for me, it's a sort of it's a delicate balance between enabling these analytical capabilities but doing it in a responsible and trustworthy manner.
Very interesting. Thank you, Alasdair. How does this align with GDPR concepts of minimal focused collection?
I don't think it contradicts any of the GDPR regulations. Obviously, it has to be done with GDPR compliance. So I would look at it from two sides. First of all, there is a lot of information that is already sitting on internal systems about customers that are not made available to the analyst today. So there is no additional data being acquired here. It's more about productive utilization of what you already have. So that would be the first point to make, is I think we've never really used all the information that we've had in order to defend ourselves against bad actors within the system. The second point, I think, is more skewed towards when you're looking at the investigation side of things and looking into people's social profiles and so on and so forth. The approach that I advise clients within the industry is that has to be done on the context of justification. So I don't think, well, there's 2 points here. One, I don't think any organisation wants to gather information without a business justification for it. I think regardless of GDPR, people utilise a level of common sense that would not be the right thing to do. But GDPR, puts that into law and makes sure that people are compliant with it. But you see that companies really do try and limit that kind of activity. So in the financial sense, in the banking world, you would have what's called a suspicious activity report. So there would be something that would start to highlight the potential bad actor or bad breach. That would then justify further gathering of information, and then a re-triangulation of that individual's activities, which then could lead to a full investigation of that individual. So it's very much within a process and a control framework that allows organisations to act responsibly. But certainly GDPR is something that people will always have to be mindful of. When I talked about the monetary fines, you can start to see GDPR fines ramping up as well, and people have to act within that framework. But there's no checkbox when you apply for a bank account or you buy an insurance product that says, please do not check me for fraud in the future. So there is a justified business rationale for doing these checks, gathering this information and running these analytics, but it has to be done in a responsible and controlled manner, not something that is done across the board and not something that is done without justification.
Thank you for that clarification, Alasdair. So what about security? How does Trifacta handle sensitive data?
I'll let Alasdair speak a little bit as having implemented this in various places within his career, but Trifecta does inherit the native security that's already set in place. So however you've set up your architecture, especially if it's, if you're on the cloud using AWS or Microsoft Azure, the security parameters that are already set in place, that will be inherited through Trifacta. And if there is any specific questions you have about security or anything related to how Trifecta operates, we can have somebody from our team reach out and go into as much detail as you need. But at a high level, it just natively inherits the security that's already been dictated, usually by IT. But Alasdair, if you have anything to add to that, actually having implemented this in a modern architecture stack, please feel free to add anything.
I mean, it's probably one of those topics that you could have a standalone webinar on. It's not actually probably, yeah. You could easily have a standalone webinar on it. I think if we quickly go through the people, process and technology, I think on the people side, you have to ensure there's a segregation of duty. that people can't sort of check their own homework, that people don't have look at access, and that the people who enforce the security are not able to actually change anything, and so on and so forth. So that's a sort of Sarbanes-Oxley style compliance. If you look at the technology, I would say I would actually be very reluctant if a tool like Trifacta told me they did their own security. That would be a bit of a problem to me. So the fact that Trifacta inherits security gives me reassurance. I want Active Directory and two-factor authentication to do my authorization and my authentication of users. I want my Active Directory groups and my policy manager to do the authorization of what they can see. And then I want my encryption and tokenization solutions to protect the data. So it gets back to that sliding scale that I talked about, and you have to look at individual controls by people's job role. So very simple example, everybody wants to see customer data. Doesn't matter if it's a financial organization or any kind of organization. But what is your justification to see that data? And we talked about the marketing function. You can run a marketing model with either completely anonymized data or tokenized data with referential integrity intact, and still get all of your answers out of that model the same as you would with data in the clear. The justification for personal information in the clear in most organizations is actually quite low, and can be data can be protected en masse, and then exceptions granted based on that person's job role. So if you're a customer advisor and you need to see someone's name, then fair enough, but do you need to see their social security number? You certainly never need to see their credit card details. So what you find is when you look through the lens of what is that person's job role and justification for looking at that information, actually you can be quite pessimistic on the protection, the stuff that needs protected, and then protect the data at rest and in transit. And then when a Trifacta comes along, people can still do their job based on the inheritance of all those other security mechanisms. I know that's quite a long answer, but actually it is quite a detailed topic.
That's excellent information. Thank you, Alasdair and Matt. Next question that came in is, does Trifacta have taxonomies for the different industries they support?
Yeah, I had a quick slide on this that had some of our customer base listed on it, and we also have that some of that information available on our website as well. But we support various industries. Pretty much, if you have data and you need to prepare it and clean it, you have a use for Trifacta. But we have a heavy base of customers within the banking and financial sector, insurance, retail, marketing and analytics, and a lot of consulting as well, and usually used for data onboarding purposes, taking customer data, cleaning and preparing it to put it into some kind of proprietary system, whether that be wealth management, tax and audit, anything like that. So yeah, we spread across a lot of various industries and even government sectors as well.
All right, thank you very much, Matt.
The question was specifically on. I'm sorry, I just wanted to say the question was specifically on taxonomies. Trifacta, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, doesn't sell sort of data dictionaries or anything like that. However, it does, again, a bit like the security, import them. So if you guys have metadata sources that you want to use within the analysis, Trifacta can read those, and I don't know the sort of capability matrix off the top of my head, but I know that I've using it with like the information industry models, for example. So it's certainly something that you can import, but it's not something that the Trifacta guys sell.
Right, correct, yeah.
All right, great clarification. Thank you, Alasdair and Matt. The next question is on machine learning. What is the role of machine learning in Trifacta?
There's basically two ways that machine learning is involved in Trifecta. So we use machine learning within our product to help the user wrangle, and I'll explain what some of those are. And then there's also Trifecta used for machine learning. So within our product, the machine learning is, you really see how we're leveraging that within some of the predictive suggestions. So when you go into Trifecta and you select a portion of the data, we'll use machine learning algorithms to try to predict what you want to do with that data and offer a suggestion for you to make it easily, you know, whether you're extracting data, you're filtering data, you're excluding data, anything like that. We try to do the heavy lifting for you. Also, when you're either merging through a join or through like a union of the data, we do try to find the most logical entry point for those, or the keys, and that's all driven by machine learning. And then also the product, as you use it, will learn the data you're using and how you're using it, and might offer suggestions quicker based on your previous actions. And then kind of externally, where Trifecta is used in machine learning is if you're building some kind of algorithm or model and you need to clean and prepare the data to put that into, to be consumed by a model. That would be where Trifecta would work in conjunction with machine learning.
Hi, thank you, Matt. Very interesting. We talked a little about the customer base, so could you tell us what are the typical analytics use cases Trifecta addresses?
Yeah, I'd say the three most common are, well, machine learning and AI is one that I just touched upon, and then one we call data onboarding, which would be taking various data sources or continuous flow of new data sources. For instance, if you're, let's say you're a tax consultant and you have a tax system you want to put your data into, and you get clients pretty regularly, and you've got to clean and prepare that data for your proprietary system. A lot of our customers will use that, and that could also be like marketing as well, marketing intelligence. So if you're getting data from social media, you're getting it from anywhere that you run ads, you can easily combine that data together, clean, restructure it to put into any kind of system or reporting software that you need to. And then finally, like dashboarding or any kind of reporting. If you're taking various source data, putting it together to create maybe a master data set, or if you're wanting to get a 360 view of your customers like Alasdair described, you could take all the different source data points you have on a customer and put that into a singular report, and then that report can be shared out. So I'd say that's the top three. There's obviously gray area there, but I would say machine learning and AI, data onboarding, and dashboard and visual analytics.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So what is the typical persona of somebody who uses Trifecta?
Yeah, I'll also let Alasdair chime in on this one, since he's worked with a lot of people who've actually used it. But I would say it's a pretty large spectrum. So data scientists like to use Trifecta, to be able to clean and prepare their data pretty easily before they do any kind of code or AI or anything like that. It's intuitive and it doesn't require code, which usually is not a typical highlight for a data scientist, but it doesn't also require you to learn a new language or pick up a skill that's going to take you, dusting off an old textbook or going back and taking a course at a university to be able to understand. You can go right in and kind of dive right in and understand it pretty quickly. So even if you know code, and we also have extensibility to where if you do have code, you can use that within the product. But also on the opposite end of that, if you're a business analyst where you're mostly using Excel, it is ideal for you also because it's in a grid-like fashion. Everything's point and click. It's natural language. Everything's easily, you can easily understand it, and you don't have to go through a rigorous training process to be able to grasp the concepts. And then you've got everybody in between there, from a data engineers building pipelines, or anybody else. So it kind of can be useful for really any analytical role. And so, and again, if you have data and you have to prepare it and clean it, it could be useful for your day-to-day.
Yeah, I would just add to that, rather than talking about personas, I find that the people who get most excited about this are enthusiastic personalities. So if I look back at the rollout that we did at Nordea Bank in Copenhagen, and we used to have Trifacta days, and those started off with a couple of key influencers within the organisation who really had these problems and they wanted to do something about it, and they become sort of force multipliers for the entire organisation. I'm pretty sure, before I left the bank, we had a Trifacta day and it was almost 100 people, so a train the trainer type thing going on. So you see all those sort of classic data science type people, business operations people love the tool, but it's really, you're looking for enthusiastic people who can spread the word in the enterprise that there's a different way of doing things. There is a tendency, I know, in our day-to-day to keep doing what we've done before, and in this instance it might be spreadsheets, it might be desktop SaaS, it might be AI and other things. But when people see the power that can come from this, and you do that through people who are generally open to trying the approach, then that's where I had the most success.
Well, Alasdair and Matt, thank you. Great answers to some very good questions. For those of you that asked questions that weren't answered today, we will be sending all unanswered questions to Alasdair, Matt, and the Trifacta team so they can follow up with you after today's webinar. I have just a few quick announcements. Please mark your calendars for January 28th, 2020, and our next ESC webinar, The Beautiful Science of Data Visualization. Also, today's taping will be available for on-demand viewing later today and can be found on the homepage of Data Science Central in the webinar tab located at the top of the page. Past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com. If you haven't had the opportunity to view them, I encourage you to take a look. They provide very useful insight into a wide variety of topics of interest to our data science community. This brings today's webinar to a close. I'd like to thank our audience for their attendance and thoughtful questions. And a special thanks again to Trifacta for their sponsorship, as well as to our speakers today, Alasdair Anderson and Matt Derda, for their insight into today's topic. My name is Stephanie Glen, and I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event. I look forward to seeing you all again on January 28th, 2020. Have a great day.